iOS. Most people only ever use one of two mobile operating systems, and iOS is one of them. iOS is built around control. Apple makes the hardware, the software, and sets the rules for how everything works. That's why iPhones feel so consistent. Devices behave similarly. Updates arrive at the same time, and apps are usually optimized. Performance is stable, animations are predictable, and weird bugs are rare. Security is a big part of this. Apps go through the App Store, get reviewed, and only then reach users, which reduces the chances of malicious software. But that control comes with trade-offs. Installing apps outside the App Store has always been limited, and even now, it's handled very carefully. Apple only allowed sideloading in the EU in 2024, and even that, they did it reluctantly. Outside the EU, the App Store is still the only door in. If Apple doesn't approve something, it's usually not happening. Customization is also restricted. You can tweak a few things, but most iPhones still look and feel the same. And once you're in the ecosystem, you're in. Leaving can feel like trying to move out while all your stuff is still inside. It's a system that avoids chaos by simply not allowing it in the first place, which is great until you try to do something slightly different and realize the system already said no. Android is built very differently from iOS, and that difference starts at the foundation. At its core, Android is open source through the Android Open Source Project. That means companies can take it, modify it, and build their own version on top of it. Almost every manufacturer does exactly that. What Google makes is just one version. Samsung has its own, OnePlus has its own, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo all take the same base and reshape it. So while they're all technically Android, using them can feel like using completely different systems that just happen to share the same name. This is where fragmentation comes in. On one side, it's a strength. Manufacturers can experiment, add features, and build devices at every price point. If iOS feels like a single, carefully designed path, Android feels like a whole map with multiple routes, and at least one path that leads somewhere you didn't mean to go. But that flexibility comes with trade-offs. When Google releases a new version, like Android 15, it doesn't instantly reach every phone. Each manufacturer has to modify it, test it, and then decide when or if it gets released. That can take months, sometimes close to a year. So while one phone is running the latest version, another is still waiting like it's checking for updates every day, hoping today's finally the day. This also affects security. Updates include important patches, and when devices don't get them regularly, it means hundreds of millions of phones are running outdated software with known vulnerabilities. Google might patch a critical exploit today, and your phone might get it 6 months later, or honestly, maybe never. iPadOS. For a long time, iPads were basically just big iPhones. Same software, same behavior, just stretched across a bigger screen. That changed in 2019 when Apple split it off as iPadOS 13. Not a dramatic rewrite on the surface, but a clear signal that a tablet shouldn't behave exactly like a phone that went to the gym. iPadOS started adding features that actually use the extra space. Multitasking became a thing. Then Stage Manager showed up, trying to push it closer to a desktop experience. External display support also improved. Instead of just mirroring your screen, you can extend it, which makes the iPad feel less like a companion device and more like it's auditioning to replace your laptop. File management is finally usable too. With USB support and a proper file system, moving files doesn't feel like a negotiation anymore. And Safari is no longer a mobile browser pretending to be useful. It behaves much closer to a desktop one. But there are still limits. No full Mac OS apps, and multitasking still doesn't fully reach laptop level. Technically, it still shares the same core as iOS, but the experience is different enough that separating them makes sense. And that matters, because Apple keeps pushing the iPad as a laptop replacement, which means iPadOS isn't just about features. It's trying to convince you that your laptop is optional, while still quietly refusing to become one itself. HarmonyOS. Huawei didn't wake up one day and decide to build a new operating system for fun. It got pushed into it. After US sanctions cut Huawei off from Google services and later key chip technologies like ARM, the problem wasn't just hardware, it was software. The phones could still run Android at a basic level, but without Google apps, the experience outside China suddenly became a lot harder to sell. That's where HarmonyOS comes in. The early versions, HarmonyOS 1 through 3, weren't really a clean break. They were still heavily based on Android and could run APKs. The main difference was on top. Google services were replaced with Huawei's own ecosystem, App Store, Cloud, and System apps. So functionally, it was Android wearing a different jacket. And in China, where Google services aren't part of the ecosystem anyway, most users didn't even feel a major difference. Then comes HarmonyOS Next, and this is where things actually change. HarmonyOS Next is not Android-based at all. It's built on Open Harmony and Huawei's own architecture. No Android capability, no APK support. If apps want to run, they have to be built specifically for it. That makes it a genuinely separate operating system, not just a modified one. But here's the part a lot of tech channels get wrong. HarmonyOS Next is currently limited to China. Devices sold internationally are still running Android-based HarmonyOS or EMUI. The Huawei phone in Europe is still Android underneath. This is one of the first serious attempts by a major smartphone company to step completely outside the Android and iOS ecosystem since Windows Phone. And unlike smaller experiments, Huawei has the scale and hardware ecosystem to actually attempt it at a regional level. Whether it works isn't just a tech question. It's about developers, adoption, and global politics all happening at the same time. Because building an operating system is one thing, getting the world to actually move with it is a completely different problem. webOS. Palm shipped something in 2009 that quietly understood modern smartphones before modern smartphones did. webOS was their last serious attempt to stay relevant while the iPhone was already changing everything. Instead of copying what everyone else was doing, it introduced card-based multitasking. Every app lived as a card you could swipe through or flick away to close. It felt fast, natural, and still holds up surprisingly well. It also brought in gesture navigation from the bottom of the screen. Swipe up to go home. Move between apps with gestures instead of buttons. At the time, it felt futuristic. Now it's just how every phone works. So the production was ahead. The problem was everything around it. HP bought Palm for $1.2 billion in 2010, which should have been the turning point. Instead, they launched the devices, waited about 49 days, and pulled the plug. Not months, 49 days. Then, HP open-sourced webOS almost immediately. And then came the touchpad fire sale. HP dropped the price to $99 to clear inventory, and it sold out almost instantly. The demand showed up right as the product was being written off. Eventually, LG acquired webOS, and now it runs on hundreds of millions of smart TVs. The OS that was supposed to compete with smartphones is now what you use to open Netflix. App switching, gesture navigation, and the general flow of modern mobile UI all trace back to ideas webOS shipped years earlier. It didn't survive as a product, but its design language quietly spread into everything else. GrapheneOS. GrapheneOS is a hardened version of Android, built for people who want maximum security and privacy without switching to an entirely different ecosystem. It's still Android underneath, but heavily modified to remove weak points. It only runs on Google Pixel devices, and that's intentional. Pixels come with strong hardware security features like the Titan M chip and verified boot, which GrapheneOS relies on. Most of what it changes is invisible at first glance. Apps are isolated more strictly. System protections are strengthened to make exploits harder, and Google services are removed by default, not hidden in a menu, actually removed from the base system. If you want them, you add them back yourself. The user base is more diverse than it sounds. Yes, it's used by journalists, activists, and people in high-risk environments, but it's also picked up by regular users who simply want more control over their data. A big part of that attention came from Linus Tech Tips covering it. That one video basically turned GrapheneOS from a niche privacy tool into something your average tech enthusiast had at least heard of. Suddenly, people who had never thought about mobile security were searching for which Pixel to buy. Of course, that level of control has trade-offs. Some apps don't work perfectly without Google services. Banking apps can be inconsistent, and features like Google Play may not function in the usual way. There are ways to soften that. GrapheneOS includes a sandboxed version of Google Play, which lets Google services run without full system access. For people who want something less strict, KaiOS exists, using micro-G to improve compatibility while still keeping a privacy focus. KaiOS. KaiOS exists in a completely different corner of the mobile world. It runs on ultra-affordable devices, often under $20, with physical keys, small screens, and full 4G connectivity. These are modern feature phones, not relics, built for people who want reliable internet access without the cost or complexity of a smartphone. A major example is the Jio phone in India. Through a partnership with Reliance, KaiOS devices reached over 100 million users, many going online for the first time. In some regions, KaiOS has actually had more users than the iPhone, which quietly destroys the idea that everyone's using flagship smartphones. Quick question, did you know KaiOS existed before this video? Drop it in the comments. And if learning about all these operating systems is actually interesting you, hit the like button. It really does help the channel. Under the hood, it's Linux-based and comes directly from Firefox OS. Mozilla spent years trying to build a web-based mobile system that would break carrier lock-in and reduce dependence on app stores. It was ambitious. It also got completely crushed commercially, but the code didn't die. KaiOS picked up the lineage and made it practical by aiming at a market nobody else wanted to serve. Even with limited hardware, it still runs apps like YouTube, WhatsApp, and Google Maps. They're simplified, but they work well enough for communication and basic use. KaiOS isn't trying to compete with iOS or Android. It's built for getting people online, not winning spec comparisons. For a huge part of the world, the first internet experience isn't a flagship phone with 5 cameras and AI features. It's a small device with a keypad running KaiOS, quietly doing its job. BlackBerry OS. BlackBerry OS dominated the enterprise world. Real-time push email, secure messaging, and that physical keyboard people love typing on. Even President Obama famously refused to give his up when he took office. The Secret Service basically had to build him a custom secured version because he wasn't switching. Typing on one felt fast, accurate, and weirdly satisfying. For a while, if your job involved emails, you probably had one. BlackBerry made email mobile before most people even thought that was possible. Getting messages instantly in your pocket felt like a superpower. And for businesses, it became essential. But then the definition of a phone started to change. When touchscreens took over, BlackBerry didn't just face competition. It faced a completely different idea of what a phone should be. Apps, media, full web browsing. Everything started moving beyond email and messaging. BlackBerry responded with BB10, its last major attempt to stay relevant. This wasn't just an update. It was a completely new system built on QNX. It had modern gestures, a fluid interface, and multitasking that actually worked well. On its own, it was a solid operating system. The problem wasn't the OS. By that point, Apple had already reshaped expectations, and Android had spread everywhere across every price range. Developers were focused on those platforms. Users were already invested in those ecosystems, and switching started to feel harder than staying. BlackBerry assumed enterprise customers would remain loyal, but they didn't. Once iOS and Android became secure enough and offered better app support, businesses moved on. So the idea that BlackBerry failed because it was bad isn't really accurate, especially with BB10. The product itself was capable. What killed it was timing and ecosystem pressure. Symbian. Long before smartphones looked the way they do now, Symbian was already running the show. It predates the iPhone by over a decade. It didn't start at Nokia either. Symbian was originally developed by Scion, then later acquired by Nokia, which turned it into a global standard. At its peak in 2007, Symbian powered around 63% of all smartphones worldwide, with Nokia alone accounting for more than 40% of the entire mobile phone market globally. If you had a smartphone before 2010, there's a good chance Symbian was running underneath it. What made Symbian work was efficiency. It ran smoothly on low-power hardware. Battery life lasted days, and it handled email, calendars, and basic apps long before that was normal. But everything it did well was built around one assumption. You had buttons. Symbian's entire interface was designed for physical keys and directional pads. So when touchscreens took over after the iPhone changed expectations overnight, Symbian had to adapt to something it was never designed for. And it showed. The touch experience felt awkward, slow, and like it was being politely forced into a role it didn't want. Nokia saw the shift coming, but couldn't move fast enough. Internal politics, too many teams, and years of investment made it hard to pivot. And by the time changes arrived, the market had already moved on. Quick note, the Nokia 3310 didn't run Symbian. That was Series 40, a simpler feature phone system. Same company, different universe. So while BlackBerry struggled with apps and ecosystems, Symbian had a deeper problem. It wasn't bad, it was just built for a world that stopped existing. Windows Phone. Microsoft didn't fail at mobile once. It failed twice, in 2 completely different eras. Before Windows Phone, there was Windows Mobile, built on Windows CE. This was the early attempt, long before 2010. It was designed for styluses, business users, and tiny on-screen buttons. Powerful for its time, but visually it always looked dated. Then, everything reset. In 2010, Microsoft launched Windows Phone 7 and basically started over from zero. New design, new interface, new identity. And it actually felt different. The Metro UI introduced live tiles, a home screen that wasn't just icons, but moving blocks of information. Messages, weather updates, everything visible without opening apps. At the time, it felt like the phone was doing the thinking for you instead of the other way around. The hardware helped too. Nokia's Lumia phones stood out immediately. Bright colors, solid builds, and cameras that quietly embarrassed a lot of competitors. So the experience was there, the design was there, but the ecosystem didn't show up. Developers didn't build for a small market share platform. Users didn't come because apps were missing. And developers didn't come because users weren't there. Then Microsoft actually made it worse. Windows Phone 7 apps didn't carry over to Windows Phone 8. Early users basically got told their phones were now legacy devices. Trust didn't recover from that. Later, under Satya Nadella, Microsoft changed strategy completely and focused on bringing services to iOS and Android instead. Business-wise, it made sense, but it was basically the end of Windows Phone. But the interesting part is what it got right. Live tiles weren't a gimmick. They were a different way of thinking about phones, where information came to you instead of you constantly checking for it. Look at Windows 11, Xbox, or Microsoft's entire visual identity. Windows Phone didn't survive as a product, but if you scroll through a Surface laptop or an Xbox dashboard today, you're looking at its ghost. The phone died, but the design philosophy quietly took over everything else Microsoft builds. Honorable mentions. A few more operating systems worth mentioning because they didn't dominate the market, but they definitely left a mark. Ubuntu Touch was Canonical's attempt to bring full desktop-style Ubuntu to a phone. The idea of true convergence sounded great, your phone turning into a PC, but it never fully came together. It's still alive today through the UB ports community, just a lot quieter than originally planned. Lineage OS is what happens when users decide they're not done with their phones just because the manufacturer is. It grew out of CyanogenMod and became the most widely used custom Android ROM. Tizen was Samsung's backup plan, a fully functional, non-Android operating system, built so they'd never be completely dependent on Google. It didn't succeed on smartphones because of the app gap, but it quietly took over smart TVs worldwide. It never replaced Android, but it made sure Samsung always had leverage. Fuchsia is Google's long-term experiment, in development since 2016, already running on devices like Nest Hub, and built on its own microkernel instead of Linux. The goal is one system across everything. Phones, speakers, cars, all connected. There's still no clear timeline for smartphones, which makes it the only thing here that isn't really past or present. And that's every mobile operating system, from Symbian's button drive empire to HarmonyOS NEXT trying to build a new one from scratch. iOS went for control, Android went for freedom, BlackBerry bet on enterprise, Windows Phone bet on design, webOS bet on gestures. Every one of them shaped how your phone works right now, even the ones that didn't survive. Which mobile OS do you think got it right? And which one do you secretly miss? Drop it in the comments. If this finally made the mobile OS landscape make sense, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now here's the thing. You just learned about the software that runs your phone, but every one of these operating systems runs on a chip, and those chips are wildly different from each other. Snapdragon, Apple Silicon, MediaTek, Tensor, Exynos, Kirin. Most people have no idea which one is actually inside their phone or why it matters. Why does an iPhone feel so smooth on less RAM? Why do some Android phones overheat while others stay cool? That's exactly what we're covering next. Every smartphone chip explained simply. Click the video on screen right now, and I'll see you there.